Always great speaking with you. Mad respect for you over the years and what you've done in the Canadian film industry. I used to read your reviews and things like that. I never knew that you were you always a director, or like I never knew that part of your life.
Well, it was a late development. I've been a film critic for 30 years, but I started playing around with digital technology. I guess I made my first short film in 2006, and it was really like a film critic getting to play with cheap cameras and editing. And editing is like when you've watched films for so long, and to be able to manipulate images is very liberating for a writer because I don't have to write it. I can just move things around, you know. And documentary filmmaking is journalism by other means, basically. Although I had a film called Al Purdy Was Here about a dead Canadian poet, and that was in TIFF 7 years ago. And this one is called The Color of Ink, and it's about a living Canadian poet. He's a poet metaphorically. He's I call Jason Logan, who is a local Toronto visionary. He makes ink from materials that he forages from the wild and sends them to artists all around the world. And oddly enough, Jason was in the Al Purdy film in a cameo. He started making ink when he picked up a black walnut from a black walnut tree. That he made it out of black walnut, and it was overlooking the statue of Al Purdy. And he started tweeting from the POV of the statue of Al Purdy, which I only discovered about halfway into filming. It was Margaret Atwood who told me when I was filming Al Purdy Was Here. So Jason's tweets ended up being in that film, the Purdy film. And at one point, we even shot him making black walnut ink, thinking, I can work that into the credits somehow. So in a funny way, I started making the ink film, before I knew I was making it, like 8 years ago when I was shooting the Purdy film.
But why did you come up with this concept of doing this as a film and to make this, interesting and even making it a part of history, something that people probably would not have gravitated to until you created this type of art for film?
Well, I wouldn't take all the credit for it. I mean, the way I'm not a filmmaker, and then I'm not trying to make a career as a filmmaker.
Mm-hmm.
Films kind of apprehend me. Like, I didn't set out to make the Purdy film. I kind of tripped over the material. And this is the same thing. I mean, as I said, Jason, who I'd known, we both come from the world of ink. We both worked in ink. I've been a writer working in it for a long time, and Jason has been a graphic designer, an art director, A-list guy working for the biggest magazines and corporations. And he worked with Maclean's when I was there. So our paths had intersected, and then we both went down our respective rabbit holes. He didn't decide to become an ink maker. He sort of fell down a rabbit hole. I didn't decide to become a filmmaker. I fell down my rabbit hole. And then at some point, the rabbit holes kind of converged. There's a lot of just pure chance. But then once you think, this could be a film. I mean, I had that footage of Jason. So it's like a germ, it's a seed. It's like, well, what do you want to do with it? And Jason says, well, can you cut me a reel? So I cut him a reel. And then I shot him making ink. And when I saw that world of alchemy on a foot square sheet of paper with a macro lens, I thought, this is a world that nobody's ever seen before. I'd love to see it blown up on the big screen. So one thing just leads to another. I mean, I just follow my nose.
Is there a particular scene for you that you just call, this is the gem, this is the one, this is the heartbeat, this is where the blood flows or the ink flows, that really represents the whole film itself? One that really got you excited, maybe even filming it, you didn't realize it, but when you got into the editing scene, that you went, wow, I am so happy we captured this scene.
Well, it's a bit of a genre of scene. There's a bunch of scenes in the film which are Jason's ink tests, which is what I just described to you, where, I mean, the conceit of this film, and it's more than a conceit, is that the ink that he makes is alive. It's living ink. And it kind of moves and acts with a mind of its own. And in a sense, it's our secret, not secret, but our silent protagonist. I mean, Jason's at the center of the film. Then there's all
Yes.
these artists who work with his ink, who are like the supporting cast of characters. But the ink is really our subject. And I got to say, when he did something with calamine lotion and lamp black ink, which he makes laboriously from scraping off from a lamp that he burns at night, soot basically. He put the lamp black ink into the calamine, and there's all of these tendrils and tentacles, and you just watch the ink like it's supernatural, the way the ink just sort of dendrites, branches, sort of as if it's out seeking something. And in a sense, I mean, I don't want to be kind of hocus pocus about it, but really I felt we just followed the ink and we found our story. And the ink took us around the world. We went to a calligrapher in Japan and a tattoo artist in Malibu and an Islamic calligrapher in London and cartoonist for the New Yorker in New York and a painter who did New Yorker covers in New York. And how do we find these people? Well, the ink found them because Jason's ink tests traveled via Instagram. He became a bit of an Instagram star. So in a sense, he sent his ink around the world and the ink found our subjects. So yeah, I give 100% credit to the ink.
Can I say this? Ink is life? Can I say that?
Well, I think it is a big part of human life in the sense that the way Jason looks at it, and historically, our first means of expression, what makes us human, is that we sort of make a mark. We sort of leave a fossil of our consciousness out there with some kind of material substance, beginning with the cave paintings, which Jason considers to be ink because it's a ritual form of expression that sort of sends a message. And I think ink has been so much with us that we don't even notice it. And of course, now it's in physical form. It's disappearing, like the rainforest. I mean, there's no lack of irony to the fact that I've been dealing with ticketing for my premiere, and you can't put your hands on a physical ticket. We are living a paperless world, And some of my older kind of friends who are less digital savvy, they say, I don't have a digital wallet. How do I, they don't know how to deal with their tickets. I'm thinking, gee, it'd be so much simpler if they were just printed.
Oh, I can't argue with that. As a film critic for so many years, are you ready for the other film critics to, make comments about your film?
Oh, yeah. I mean,
like, what's it like to be on the other side, I guess?
Well, I had my baptism of fire with the Al Purdy film, and I know what it's like to be a critic. And if you've got a friend or a colleague who's done something like that, like made a film, they're all just petrified that it's going to be bad, because it puts them in an awkward position. Nobody wants to bring down somebody's. And the Purdy film, it was good, and this one has had great advance buzz. And the funny thing about a film as opposed to a piece of writing, you cannot separate the writing from yourself. But as a director, most of it, directing's overrated. Most of it's writing and producing. It's putting all the talents together, putting the ingredients together, much like ink making, and letting them flow together. And you can also look at the film and you can separate it from yourself. Well, that's good because it's not just your work. It's all these other people's work. And it's sort of objective. Either it works or it doesn't. And it's sort of a bit of a not, what's not to like kind of situation. It's not a controversial film. It's not something that's going to polarize people. Either they'll love it or they'll like it or they'll think it's okay, but you know what I mean? So I don't worry too much about that. I mean, yeah, you want to get over the pressure of the opening night and everything else, and you'd be crazy if you're not nervous. But I'm just so grateful to all the people. I mean, when you're shooting with a cinematographer like Nick DePassier, who shot all those amazing films with Ed Bertinsky, Anthropocene and Manufactured Landscapes and Watermark. So much of your work is done for you, so much talent, so much amazing music. I spent a fortune on licensing music, which people thought was crazy for a documentary. But I was trying to make not a documentary. I wanted to make a movie that played like a movie, you know, that had songs that people recognized. And I figure if you're doing something as niche as ink, you better have a few stars in it, and you better have a few touchstones, you know, because you want to connect it to the bigger world that we live in. You know, as a critic, I've always loved films that are art films, but not just art films. I think I've succeeded in making a film about art. It's not an art film. It's sort of, I'm hoping it's a kind of film anybody could go to. You could take your kid to it. There's no, you don't have to be a cinephile or an aesthete to appreciate what's going on, and which doesn't mean it doesn't have a lot of those amazing aesthetic qualities. So, and it's definitely a big screen movie. It's something to be seen on the big screen. That's the only reason I made it, to see this world of ink magnified in the theater.
Last question: what are you hoping that fans will get from this when they get a chance to see this at the Toronto International Film Festival?
Well, it's a sense of awe and wonder. That's all we were trying to induce. And that they would come out of it and they would see the world differently. When they walk through a park, they might think, well, you know, just to look at the world and say, give it a second look, and pick something up, maybe make some ink. You know?
I love it, Brian. Like I said, mad respect for you. Congratulations on
Well,
this
that's too
on this
kind.
film.
Thank you so
And
much.
and I most likely will run into you at some point at the film festival. So I'm looking forward to seeing you. But thank you so much for the interview.
It's a small town. I'll see you there.
Jason, first, thank you so much for doing this interview. I was trying to think of how do you start an interview like this? I think the first question should be, did you ever think in your fabulous career that somehow your life would be portrayed at the Toronto International Film Festival?
I'm not even sure that I believe it now, to tell you the truth. It's just a total dream, you know, just a real like waking dream to be an ink maker, to be exploring the world through color, to be part of a film in the film festival. It's just like I don't even like having my picture taken. You know?
Yeah, you're going to have to walk the red carpet. You're going to have to, talk to reporters like myself, whisked away to the parties. I hope you enjoy this experience completely because, my friend, you absolutely deserve it, because I think what's great about this film, and before we spoke, I had a chance to talk to Brian, that it really shows, and I use the term ink is life. And I never really thought of it that way before until this film was created, and knowing the things that you've done because of where ink actually comes from and things like that. People are probably spinning and they're not sure, what are we talking about here? There's a film about what you specifically do, and I can say you're the star of this.
Yeah, I make ink from pretty much anything. And when you say ink is life, I hope I'm not giving too much away to say that there is a point where one of the inks that gets used in a kind of thrilling way is in fact blood.
You know what? It doesn't surprise me because we've seen blood used in communication many a time. So, how did this all start for you? And what would your specific title be? I wasn't sure what I would actually call you.
I like to call myself an ink maker.
Okay, so how did you specifically become an ink maker? Because from talking with Brian, it was almost like you fell into it, kind of thing.
Well, yeah, ink does have a way of sort of pulling people in magnetically, I have to admit. But there were a couple steps involved. I had a whole career as an illustrator where I was using ink to draw little doodles, and the career as an illustrator turned into I started doing jobs at the New York Times, and there was like this one day where I was at an art supply store in Manhattan, and I found this little bottle of ink, and it said black walnut ink on it, and something just kind of pinged in my head. I was like, wait a second, there's a kind of ink that's made out of like basically a tree, you know? So I bought the bottle of ink, I tried it out, I loved the way it worked. It stuck in my head that in fact there's a kind of ink that does sort of fall from trees. You know, fast forward like, I don't know, like 5 or 6 years later, and my first child was born, and I started getting like interested in non-toxic, you know, like how toxic are our art supplies and markers and stuff, and why are they always so full of chemicals? And I passed by a black walnut tree, and and that little bottle of ink that I bought in New York suddenly like came back into my head. I'm like, I think I'm gonna make some ink out of this tree, and so the rest is sort of history, you know, like it's.
So how do you go about? I'm going to jump in. How do you go about choosing what natural products, if I can use that term, to create ink? And I've never actually ever in my 30 plus years as an interviewer actually asked this question: how do you create ink? And this is something that we actually kind of get to see in this great documentary film.
Yeah, I mean, to answer the second part of your question first, like I think there's like, I love that there's this thing that it's in pens, it's in your newspaper, it's in the flyers, and you know, it's sort of anything you print out is made out of ink, and almost every time I tell people I'm an ink maker, they're like, wait, ink? Oh, ink! Like it's sort of like this. You're kind of like, I would never have even considered what it's actually made out of, you know. Yeah. So, you know, to answer the first part of, or the second part of your question, I think there is something just sort of amazing about going deep into a thing that everyone's uses and kind of has a sense of, but just kind of taking it apart a little bit and thinking about how really is it made. And well, for me, it as I said, it started with the black walnut. So it's like really, really simple to make black walnut ink. You basically just like, you find a black walnut tree, you wait till the nuts fall to the ground, you just like pick them up, throw them in a pot, boil them up, and essentially that is black walnut ink. And it's beautiful. It's got this rich, dark, it sort of starts with this sort of coffee brown color, and then you add a little more and it becomes this sort of mahogany brown color, and then it darkens to an almost black brown color, and it's just like just this kind of glossy, beautiful, you can use it in a calligraphy pen, you can paint with it, it's a beautiful, beautiful ink, you know? So black walnut, number one. Then I was like, okay, well, what other natural things could I maybe make ink out of, you know? So it was like, I think the next one was sumac. I love sumac's all over the place in Toronto, you know? And I was like, I don't know, I just always noticed it as a kid. I always loved this plant. And so I started making sumac ink. And then then I tried turmeric ink. And then at some point I just started saying like, well, I'm just going to make ink out of anything. I kind of threw away the whole, I didn't throw away, but I put off to the side the whole, it has to be non-toxic and natural, and it has to come from a plant, and just started thinking about all the different colors you find in a city. So, you know, a brick, chunk of drywall dust, a scrap of iron, a little bit of copper wire, like all of those things make extraordinarily beautiful color. And when you kind of start mixing them together, they really do some interesting stuff.
Do you ever get requests from people from around the world asking you specifically for a type of ink from a certain product, or are you somebody who just makes it available if somebody wants something?
Oh, I love nothing better than a weird request. You know, I make stuff available, you know, but there's no job I like better than someone calls me up and says, hey, can we make ink out of this? And I, of course, immediately say, yes, we can, you know, and then I'm like, I go back into my studio and I'm like, oh my God, like, how am I actually going to pull this off, you know? But, you know, and it's everyone from, you know, a poet retiring from the University of Michigan who wanted 5 different colors of black made 5 different kinds of ways, to Harley Davidson called me up and said they wanted an ink made out of coffee, to, you know, someone coming to me with actually like an idea, like a couple were getting married and they were like, we want an ink that kind of encapsulates our are coming together, you know. So there were flowers from the place that they got engaged, and some rocks from this like mountain that they climbed up, and they sent me all this stuff FedEx, and I made it into this sort of this ink that kind of represented their love, like, so that it's like you can make ink out of things, and you can make ink out of ideas, and at the heart of it, ink making is an intensification of meaning,
Yeah.
Not to
You
get
know,
too,
it's
woo-woo
so
on you, but
funny. I've got this picture of you like in the 1950s, mad scientist movies where you have the bottles and the Bunsen burner, and and you're like, ha ha ha, I've created the ink of whatever. I think this is great. But when you were approached to have your story told on the big screen, what were your thoughts on this? And I know it wasn't like an overnight thing. This took a long time to actually make it happen.
yeah, no, it was many years in process, and you know, I sort of felt like from very early on, I kind of felt like I had like I was on a bit of a crusade, and my crusade is like, it's not just about the crazy. Well, frankly, I love being a mad scientist with my bubbling Bunsen burners. Like, not to diss that scene because I love it, but my like I had this crusade in my mind, kind of right from the beginning, very near the beginning, which was like, which was kind of almost like about the birth of my kids, where I was like, there are ways of making color out there that we humans have been doing, since the first like person like, used their hand on a cave wall, kind of, and it kind of got taken away from us when everything got packaged up, and it was like art has to be from the art supply store, like we're not allowed to just kind of paint stuff with our fingers, or you can't use a berry or a rock, so um I have, when I said that I'm a bit camera shy and I hate getting my picture taken, like, it's true, but even bigger than that is I really do want to like support this idea that there could be a kind of revolution in natural color.
Yeah.
So when when I was approached about doing some kind of film, I was like, let's do it. If I can bring in all these amazing people that I know and these kind of networks of other people experimenting with color, and if I can be kind of the guide, like it's almost like if the camera's kind of behind me and you're just sort of seeing all the crazy stuff that I'm seeing through if I can be the kind of like David Attenborough version of a ink guy artist, like I love the idea of sort of just introducing people to some of the excitement about just kind of getting your hands dirty, experimenting, like falling in love with cities, going on adventures, and using ink as the kind of passport to all of that. And when I heard that there was a chance of making a film that was like a little bit of a kind of road trip adventure, like I was in, I mean, and we went to Mexico, we went sort of virtually, we went to the Italy and Japan, and like it's got this kind of worldwide web of color feel to it, that it was a real adventure making it. It was a real adventure making it.
Is there a particular natural product? No, I'll keep using that term.
Mm-hmm.
That you want to use, that you may have to travel somewhere, that may take months, could be on some remote mountaintop, just to be able to get this great? Is there something that I just the look on your eyes? I can see that there is something that you're like, yeah, I'd love to get a hold of, but it's like, almost like the Indiana Jones kind of thing to try to get to use.
Well, there's a bunch of little holy grails in the world of like discovering natural pigments and stuff, but the thing that came up when you said that came right into my mind was this. Years ago, I worked with a guy who's like a perfume, like a guy who's a nose, who like really does all the perfume stuff. And
Yes.
He was telling me about this scent that was very popular around the turn of the century turn of the last century, with like rich Parisian women, and the scent was from this small little like a little bush that lived on an island in Greece, and the wild goats that were on this like the rocky mountainsides of this little Grecian island would rub their little belly furs against this shrub, and the shrub had this kind of sap in it, and the belly fur of the goat would form these little balls, and then those balls of like sappy little balls would go back to Paris, and they would go in the purses of these like wealthy women of Paris. And I've been experimenting a lot with how inks sort of smell, and like the full kind of like experience of inks. So I don't know. I wrote down the name. It's like a secret island, you know, and I wrote down the name of it when I was talking to this guy, and I was like, one day I'm going back. Well, I've never been to Greece. One day I'm going to go to Greece. I'm going to find that island. I'm going to find those goats. I'm going to find one of those little fur balls, and I'm going to somehow use, I don't know, whether it's some of the sap or a little bit of that scent in, maybe it's like a binder for my ink or some kind of little touch of a secret ingredient for one of my inks.
Amazing, amazing.
I mean, I could talk all day about my Indiana Jones ideas, you know.
I hope it. No, honestly, I hope it happens for you. I love your vibe, and I love how much you love what you do. Not a lot of people get a chance to say that, and it sounds like you're living out your dream every time you get a chance to create something like this.
Yeah, I found a dream job, and I hope that like when people see the film, that it kind of like, I don't know, there's almost something about all these weird ingredients coming together on the big screen that kind of, like, I kind of want it to blow people's minds, you know? Like, I want it to feel like a bit of a, like it's a trip, you know? Like you've gone to that little tiny Grecian island, or the little coast of Mexico that no one else is allowed on, or like, I want that, I think there's a sense of that, not just of my excitement, but actually the adventure of the materials themselves.
I hope they do too, because when we have things like this and, you know, what we're talking on, we lose a bit of that art form all the time. And I think it's very important for what you do because, as you said, you know, visually, smell, touch, I think it's all still extremely important and connects us to the creation of man, the creation of communication, and you're right there in the center of this, my friend.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, it's, yeah, if just one person sort of turns their phone over for a minute and, you know, opens the door and goes into the back alleys and just like looks at some weeds in a new way, I think it is that sense of using all your senses, using your fingers. Like, this is, we were given these things, you know, we were born with all these amazing senses. And I do feel like when you spend all your day kind of moving boxes around on a computer, you start to lose some of your sort of body senses, you know, some of our superpowers.
I absolutely agree with you on that. Congratulations on this film. And most likely I'm going to run into you somewhere as the film festival continues. And I hope people get a bang out of this because this is amazing. Congratulations. Thanks, on all of this.
You're gonna see me at some part, you know, some TIFF party, and I'm gonna be taking the last little dregs of someone's wine glass and grabbing some little hairs from a red carpet, and you know.
There we go.
I'm gonna be that guy.
I love it. Thanks again.
Thank you.